Hi, welcome to Dorset Marine Training's Evening Sessions 2020, and we have recorded these sessions so that people who missed them or people who wanted to see them again could actually get that updated information. And please feel free to get in touch and comment on them and let us know how you found them. So I'm just going to switch over to our presentation, just share the other window with you, and then we'll set off. So the first session that we ran this year was just a basic chart chat session, and the idea was to give you just an informal revision or springboard into basic learning about charts, how they worked and how you could use them. So to give you a little bit of background on us, myself and Sarah, if you've not met us before, run Dorset Marine Training and Harbour Sea School in Poole Harbour, and we teach everybody from beginners to yachtmaster level. We're both sailors. We very much focus on power-based learning from small craft up to large things, and work with commercial and leisure users. So again, the idea of these chart sessions, general theory sessions, were just to give you a little bit of revision or to springboard you into actually trying out some courses, whatever sort of level you might want to attain. Please feel free to get in touch. The email address is shown at the bottom here, inquiries@dorsetmarinetraining.co.uk, and also follow us on our social media channels. If you search for Dorset Marine Training on any social media channel, you'll find us and see what we're doing there. So, just to give you a little bit more of an introduction to what we're going to do in this session, the idea was to introduce people to charts, talk about what they actually do for us, where do we get them from, and what do they actually show us, what information they're going to give us, how can we use them. Really not to be afraid of them and to actually see them as tools, useful pieces of kit in our boating array. So what I'm going to do is just switch over to my chart cam, and we can actually get a little bit of hands-on before coming back and revising through what they do and just making sure we cover all the points that I want to go through with you this evening. So if I just switch over, we have an overhead camera on the chart table, which actually allows you to get a bird's eye view of what I'm seeing here. And really just want to go through all the basic features that we've got on a chart. Now I've picked up some IMRAE charts. We'll detail shortly what the difference is between the different chart manufacturers, but this is the one that we use quite a lot with all of our basic training. It's a Poole Harbour chart, and all I've done is opened up the leaflet and taken and unfolded the Poole Harbour chart within. I know it's Poole Harbour because again it reminds me it's that at the top. I don't know if you saw on there was a Y23 code. Every chart has its own code, and if we were to actually look at the bottom of the chart, then we can see that same code is shown to us down there alongside the date. So this is slightly old, 2016. It is actually 2020 now, so we could possibly do with a slightly updated one. Just to start with some of the basics, let me just zoom the camera down a touch. Just drop that down, and we can see that as well as highlighting the area that it's in, it also gives us a color coding, a key to the colors we see. In this chart, we've got green on the land, yellow what we call drying area, white water, not necessarily very deep water, but water, and then blue is deeper water still. So it gives us an indication as to what sort of depths of water we're seeing just at that level. We've also got a scale. So quite important this. I'm going to just zoom down a little bit more, and here at the top of the chart we've got, it says natural scale at latitude blah 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 is 1 to 17,000. So that means that for every 1 centimetre or 1 inch we measure on the chart, it represents 17,000 centimetres or 17,000 inches for real, in real life. Just to give you an idea, the other chart that I had, chart C4, that actually was for the whole coastal area outside Poole, and you can see That's got a natural scale, it says, of 1 to 75,000. So on that particular chart, we wouldn't be able to actually use the details of Poole Harbour. We need to have actually zoomed in, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. We've also got written information around here. It tells us a little bit about things in Poole. And if I just turn to the other side of the chart, just looking around the outside of the chart, we've got lots of information about things like channel markings, speed limits, what we're allowed to do, how fast we're allowed to go. And if I come down to the bottom of the chart, lots of other little bits of information that are written around the outside of the chart. So quite often just actually stopping and having a look around the chart, reading it if it's an area that you're going to actually navigate to, finding out the information on that chart can be quite useful, just having a read around it. We've also got around the chart objects on land. So you can see around here there's references to things such as trees. There's a little cross here which represents a church. And if I come back over to the main Poole area, we can see around the town, around Poole Town Quay, we've got things like, there's a telephone here, another church, post office, chimney. So if we're actually on the water and we're trying to identify our position, actually seeing physical objects on land can be quite useful to give us a reference, and it's nice to actually be able to identify those from the chart. One of the examples here, a white building that is 47 meters high. So whoever's put the chart together has actually assembled it from information that they've seen at sea, from positions that they think are going to be useful to you when you're actually navigating on the water. We've also got a scale. I'll just move over to the side of the chart. We've got a scale that runs up and down the side and left and right across the top and bottom of the chart. And this is our latitude and longitude scale. So the latitude on the side of the chart, if I come down here, you can see it actually says lat. This actually tells us how far, in this case north, of the equator we are. So the equator is like a zero line, and this is 50 degrees and 42 miles north of the equator, 50 degrees and 43 miles north of the equator. And that's a really important thing to mention, because later we'll come back and have a quick look. You can actually use measuring instruments to take that mile and measure a mile between locations on the chart. If that seems a little complex, it's also given us that very same scale at the top here. You can see it goes from 0 up to 1 nautical mile just over there. So that's quite useful. So the combination of the latitude scale and the longitude scale actually allows us to produce a grid reference to identify where we are anywhere on the planet, as long as we're actually using the correct chart for the area that we're boating in. The other thing we've got here, just below, in this part of the chart, is something we call a compass rose. And in a very basic term, this literally tells us that north is 0 degrees. If we're heading north, we're going 0 degrees. East is 90 degrees. Let's push it up a little bit. South is 180 degrees, and west is 270 degrees. What it's also telling us, slightly technical in the middle, is that there's a slight difference between north on the chart and all of these grid lines here that you can see, these black grid lines, those run north-south, and these black grid lines are running east-west. So it's a wonderful way of actually making a parallel route, knowing which direction we're going in. We'll come back to that. But there is a slight difference when we go and measure it on a magnetic compass. And we need to know what that difference is, and it's told just there. At the moment there's 1 degree difference, so not an enormous amount. And generally what we say to people when we're teaching basic powerboating courses is that if you're not going a great distance and the variation is less than 3 degrees, probably don't need to worry too much about it, as long as you can see the objects that you're heading towards. That's a bit of an assumption, but it kind of works. So what else have we got on the chart that's useful? Buoys, floating objects that we're going to see in the water. So these are actually marked. Any visual references, things that we're going to see actually at sea are shown, and we can actually use those to our advantage to plot a route. We've also got hazards, and probably the best example in Poole Harbour, if I move the chart a little bit, is down here. It's a hazard that is actually a chain ferry. If you're coming into Poole Harbour, that runs across the entrance. Fortunately, we've got some information down at the bottom of the chart that actually tells us about the ferry. There we go. So it even tells us, if we have a look around the chart, a chain ferry operates between 2 points and tells us what's happening and what lights and shapes it's showing to help us navigate around it safely. A couple of other things we've got on the chart. These little diamonds. These can actually be used in conjunction with tables on the chart to figure out which direction the tide's going in. So if I know a reference point, a high water or a low water time in the port that I'm visiting, then I can actually look at the data for those diamonds and figure out not just which direction the tide's going in, the water's flowing, but actually how fast it's going, which is really quite useful if we're planning a route. And in a later session, we'll look at passage planning and how that factors in it quite importantly. We've also got some other hazards around here. Remember, we said that the yellow bits were drying areas, water that sometimes disappears completely and the land is uncovered. So that's quite useful to know. What else have we got? Well, other information around the chart. Let me just turn it over again one more time. And at the top of the chart here, we've got information about the people who run the port, in this case Poole Harbour Commissioners, and even how things like the lifting bridges work, and even the VHF radio channels we can contact them on. If I move around the chart a little bit, we've got phone numbers and contact details for marinas down the side. So there's an enormous amount of information around the chart, and if I was actually visiting a place for the first time, I literally would open out the chart in front of me and examine it in detail. So let's have a look back at the presentation and just see if we can expand upon some of those topics that we've talked about. So, important things for us to remember. First of all, who has actually made the chart. That's quite important because, as we'll expand on in a little second, that the colour coding does change with different manufacturers. And if you're very much used to using one manufacturer, it might be that you find it a little bit uncomfortable to change to a different chart. It might be that you go to other countries. Generally, we use Imre and Admiralty. Those are the two main chart manufacturers in the UK. Other chart manufacturers are available, but we need to make sure that we are not making assumptions if we're using Imre charts based on an Admiralty appearance and vice versa. The other thing to mention is they do come in different packets, different representations. So this image here I've got is of what we call a folio pack. So it's a whole set of 10 A1 sheets of paper that cover a whole coastline, and you may get a folio pack for the Dorset coast, maybe the Hampshire coast or Cornwall coastline, and it has every chart that you'd need for those different ports, albeit at different scales. The one that we've just looked at is an Imre, folds up into a nice little A4 packet, and we can actually buy it from a local supplier quite easily. So just to expand upon those, and I tend to feature these because these are the ones that, certainly for leisure users at a basic level, they're the easiest ones to get hold of. And the really nice thing is when you're looking at the front covers, you can see there's actually an indication of what geographical area that chart covers. So this one that we've just been using, chart Y23, that covers the Poole Harbour area here. If I wanted to go over to the Isle of Wight, I don't know if you folks can see, there's the Isle of Wight there, then I would need to actually buy myself a C4 chart, which covers the geography in between on a smaller scale. And then actually once I get over to the Isle of Wight, maybe I'd buy a C15 chart, which gives me a slightly larger scale, more detailed view of the Solent area. If we just see, there you go, we can zoom in on what's on the front of the C4 chart, And you can see that little box is telling us which area geographically that chart covers. So you can find links to all of these from imray.com/charts. And if you wanted somewhere on the high street to buy them, somewhere like a Force 4 chandlery, again, other chandleries are available, and you can head there and pick up a chart off the shelf. And these all come in a slightly sort of a waxy surfaced presentation, so they're slightly resistant to moisture, although if you drop it in the sea, it won't last very long. So what is the chart actually telling us? Well, as we said, you've got a representation for different color coding. And what I like to try and get people to think about is how you've got a representation of a landscape as you're seeing it. So if you think of the chart as being very much this three-dimensional view turned into a two-dimensional representation. And the example we've got on the screen here is Dartmouth down in Devon. So this is the chart image that I'd be using to navigate in, and this is the topography, if you like, the geography that we'd actually see when we're there. And you've got details like, for example, here on the hill, there's an object, there's a building, it looks like some kind of chimney, and it's actually detailed here on the chart so that you could actually make a note of where that was and recognize it. This is what you'd see during the day. There's even floating buoys in the water, and again, there's representations on the chart as to where those are. The rocks that we've got to watch out for, those are dotted around here, and again, they're shown on the chart here. So it literally is just a two-dimensional representation of what we're seeing. We even took a Google Earth image of the same entrance to the River Dart, and you can see it just looks a little bit different, but it's still showing you the same thing. This little cove up here, there's this little indentation here. Can't quite see the chimney on this one, but then we can see this rock down here. That's quite obvious in that satellite image, and that's the rock that's just there. So what we've got to try and do is take the image that we're seeing on the chart in our brain and convert it into what we're going to actually meet on the water when we get there. And at more advanced levels of chart work, this is what we'd be doing. We're preparing ourselves for going into somewhere new. So let's have a look at those different chart manufacturers that I talked about. And this is something that's important to realize. These are two identical shots, identical scale shots of an Admiralty chart. That's the one that we're seeing on the left-hand side here, and an IMRAY chart. It's the west coast of the Isle of Wight, Needles Point, with the famous Needles Lighthouse, and the entrance to the Solent up here. And you can see actually it's quite confusing if you were used to using one, where you've got, as we said in the case of the IMRAY chart, green land, yellow drying area, white, and then blue as the water gets deeper. It's completely reversed on an Admiralty chart. So we've got yellow for the land, green for the drying area, blue for the water, and white for deeper water. You've also got some contour lines here that are drawn ever so slightly differently. Now it might be this is a slightly later chart version, or it might just be that it's based upon slightly different survey data. So that's also something we've got to be careful of. Have we actually got a most up-to-date chart, and where's the survey data coming from? If we're going to places that are quite unusual, out in the middle of nowhere that not many people visit, then it might be that that area is not being surveyed as much. Maybe the chart's not as detailed, maybe the chart's a bit older. And as we said before, other chart manufacturers are available. So again, just a reminder that it's an aerial view we're seeing. This is back in Poole Harbour, and this is a satellite image we got from straight Google Map. And I love the fact that this image actually shows over here sort of what looks like a sand bar type arrangement and a mottled effect over the other side of the channel. And we know it's a channel because if I overlay the chart on top of it, we can see there's that buoyed channel there. And that's what we're seeing if I just go back and forth, that sandbar. And on the chart, it is indeed that. Because this is an Admiralty chart now, the green is the drying area. And really that's something that we're trying to avoid. And when we talk about sort of navigating and how to actually measure reference points, staying inside this channel is going to be the important bit. So I need to be able to use the chart to go off and navigate in different directions. Here again is another shot of Poole. Is the peninsula at Sandbanks, North Haven Point is shown here. And this is quite a narrow channel where all the tide's going to flow through. So we've got one of those tidal diamonds to actually help us figure out what speed it's travelling at. There's also loads of buoys that help us navigate safely around this drying area. You can actually see on this satellite image that drying area is visible from above. But when you're down at water level, you wouldn't see it at all. Everything's just blue water, so you'd need to actually come up with some notes from this chart to actually navigate safely. If we want to go around the back of the islands, or to visit the seals, this is the view of the same sort of area, the entrance to the harbour, and in the distance you get over to this area. We want to go over here and see seals. So we need to actually be able to figure out how to use the chart to take us through this incredibly narrow channel route to get around there. So if you want to actually get into interesting places, you can see, going back to that previous image, looking around here, this is all just water. Lovely, lovely water. But when we actually overlay the chart, most of that is this green area. So we'd actually need to find a way of recognizing the stakes, the markers, and the land objects that keep us in those channels. The next thing we need to think about is the actual date of the chart. So I've just put a list up here. If you can see that with the, if I just move the video image. These are the actual years that a pool chart was produced: 1999, 2002, 5, 8, 11, 14 and 16. So actually they update the chart and release a new version on a reasonably regular basis. We've actually just had another revision, 2020, but I don't have one of those to hand for us to check out this evening. So what I did was I actually took some images of the same part of the harbour from different charts. So this was the 2014 chart, this was the 2011 chart, this was the 2008 chart, and then I managed to get hold of quite an older one, the 1999 chart. And you can see, let's just skip back a second, you can see that those are actually showing quite different representations of this area just outside the harbour. And if you're actually navigating out through this area, there's two significant things here. One is that this sandbar is changing shape, and this is only about 3 years apart. And then you've got to ask yourself, if it's an old chart that you're using, how many years are you beyond the date of the chart that you're using? So if the sandbars or areas of seabed are changing, let's have a look. 0.3, that means it's 30 centimeters deep. Here it's minus 0.2, so that means it's 20 centimeters the other way. So it's half a meter change. And down here it's even more significant. It's about a meter between these two. So we wouldn't want to rely necessarily upon this data to navigate through these areas. That could be particularly hazardous. The other thing to note is that actually these two red and green buoys here, they've actually changed position. They've been moved. So the Harbour Authority has moved them for whatever reason, and that's reflected on the latest chart, which is this one here. So if you were measuring really precisely on an older chart and it was foggy, then the information would be wrong. You'd be heading in the wrong direction possibly. So again, we go on and we can see even these lines here which demonstrate contours, areas of equal depth. Those are changing as well. So the whole shape of the seabed is altering. If we go back a little bit further, you'll see this is quite dramatically different. So this whole area here became a little bit deeper as time went on. And then if we look back at 1999, and this is 20 years old now, you can see there's a lot of difference. And in actual fact, the buoys were significantly different here. And there was even, this represents a light on the shore. So keeping your charts up to date is really important. The other issue is that in between these publications, there is a gap where things are happening that the manufacturer of the chart might be aware of, but you might not. So quite simply with something like IMRE, if you Google IMRE corrections, it'll take you to the website and give you a list of things that have changed since the last time you purchased the chart. We could have a quick look at that. So if we just bring up a web screen, and if I change over to share that a second, we can see how that would work. There we go. If I open a new tab here, and we can type into that new tab IMRE corrections, press enter. There we go. Google's given us straight away corrections page IMRE, and it's giving us an option here to type in the chart number. And if I type in Y23, which was the pool chart we had, straight away it gives me a PDF document. There we go. And assuming that I've got the newest chart, oh no, it's relating to the 2016 chart, which is the one that I had on my desk. It's telling me that these things have happened. So various bits and bobs have changed. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can just see things like a light has been moved. The depths have changed in the approaches to Poole Harbour, and it's actually giving us grid references for those depth changes, and the responsibility then becomes ours to change them, which gets a little bit technical. We need to be able to measure the latitude and longitudes to be able to do that. But it's great to know that we can update our own charts. So let's have a look about scale. The larger the scale on a chart, the more detailed it is. So the Y23 chart that we were just using was a large scale. I've got an insert here from a C4 chart, the one that actually shows us the Dorset coast. And you can see here, this is that same area outside the harbour entrance. This is where that chain ferry runs, and this is where those shallows are. Now that's actually not detailed enough to navigate with. So the C4 chart would be great for cruising down the coastline and actually getting from one place to another along the coast, maybe doing a 30-40 mile journey, but it wouldn't be good for going into Poole Harbour. If we went to somewhere like Studland Bay here, some charts are actually giving us inserts. So you can see on this chart, it's got the letter E in the corner, and somewhere else on the chart, I would actually find an insert with the letter E, and that gives me a larger scale, more detailed view of Studland Bay. So compare those two. If we go back to the previous one, this doesn't give us much information, other than the fact it does show a rock here. But if we zoom in, go and find that other slightly larger scale. So it's a bit bizarre. Smaller number on the scale equals larger scale. It's more detailed. And that shows us a much more detailed representation. We've got objects on the land that hopefully we can start to recognise, and that would help us figure out where we were in relation to these areas of rocks, which is quite useful knowing where the rocks are. We've also got, just slightly off the bottom of the shot here, unfortunately, Swanage, and that's got the letter D in the corner. And if I were to actually find that on the chart, you'd see the same again, a larger scale view of Swanage, so we can actually navigate into Swanage Harbour quite safely and use the pier and other objects that we can see as a reference point to drop anchor or get ashore in a safe manner. Again, there's a ledge over here, a big rocky ledge that we'd want to avoid. So whenever we're using charts, we're always looking for the largest scale chart available. And I've talked about some of the symbols, but we've also got lots and lots of different ones to interpret. These ones here are actually the buoys, as we mentioned earlier. And we've got a session later on to talk about buoys, specifically what they mean. But just to give you a rough overview, the reds and the greens here are marking out the main channels, and that's often what we're looking for. So we need to be able to recognise those on the chart and then figure out what we're seeing. I've assembled just some of the most basic ones that we tend to come across, our main navigation buoys. So we've got our port and starboard marks. These are the two that we actually see in the harbour, 27 and 28. They're adjacent to each other, one side of the channel and the other. What's important to realise is as you get into smaller channels, the buoys themselves actually change size as well. So here's a view of the chart, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting. That in the main channel, we were seeing that buoy number 28, which was this one, was shown by this symbol. Buoy number NC 14 or 12, I forget, is actually shown by the same symbol. So the symbols don't necessarily give you an idea of the size of the objects you're going to meet. Let's just come back a couple of slides. So this here is the main channel. I'm just drawing your attention to here in the bottom right. And this here is what we call the North Channel. And again, those symbols look identical in size. This one, the main channel, they're this big, and those ones in the North Channel are this big. So you need to actually look at more information. Maybe here we say, well, if this is a main channel and it's dredged, in fact there's no numbers in it, it means that it's actually dredged for bigger traffic. That means that we're actually aware that there's going to be huge ships going down there, and they're going to look out for large buoys. The fact that this is a smaller channel by the nature of what it's doing means that we're probably looking for smaller buoys. Ultimately, the bigger ships that come in are paying more money to the harbour authority, so there's a greater level of finance to put those larger buoys on the water. In this channel, not as much money is being spent. Maybe it serves the local yacht clubs and a smaller boat community. So these are the things to look out for. As well as the port and starboard marks that we've got these cardinal marks, which generally tell us to head off in a safe direction. And we'll come back and talk about those a bit more in another session. So, worth remembering, what you see on the chart isn't necessarily a true representation of the actual size you're going to see. Oh, I've skipped ahead. This is an idea of, we get into some of the outlying areas on the chart, and in actual fact the buoyage gets even smaller and actually becomes represented by sometimes just posts. The posts have still got the shape of the buoys on top, so this is the green starboard one, this is the red port one, and this is one of the cardinal marks, a northern cardinal. So you've still got the representations, but in actual fact on the chart itself, we might be able to just flick across to this one for a second, just to show where that appears. This area on the chart here with these red posts, we just flick across to the overhead chart cam. There we go. You can see here it actually says rules cut marked by stakes. I don't know if you can read that at a right angle, and it's going from this east cardinal here over to this east cardinal here, marked by stakes. And you can't see any representation of the actual posts on the chart. All you can see is it says marked by stakes, but what you'd actually see is this when you're heading across there. So again, the representation that you're seeing written on the chart isn't always exactly what's going to be there in front of you. So you have to have more than one thing to refer to actually find your way around an area. This has also got a speed limit sign on it, reminding us that it's a 6-knot speed limit around the south side of the harbour. That's something else that we would have seen if we'd actually read through all the notes on the chart, that part of the harbour has a specific speed limit to it. So what else have we got? We mentioned dangers, and here's just some examples of the dangers you might find on the chart. Rocks. So I've taken the area outside Poole Harbour here, a place called Old Harry Rocks, and you can see each of these little stars on the shallow area of water means that it is actually a rock. Just coming back to these contour lines, what the contour lines do is actually tell us when, in this case, the depth drops below 5 meters. Everything that's to the right of that line is more than 5, everything to the left of that line is less than 5. So once we get into less than 5 meters deep water, we need to be very careful because there's an enormous amount of rocks surrounding this area. So if you'd gone sightseeing along these cliffs or wandering in and out of the caves, having had a look at the chart first, you'd understandably be quite cautious or possibly decide not to go there at all. What else have we got? Power cables. So these purple squiggly lines, which have got the little zigzag, almost sort of lightning strike marks in them, those represent power cables. And that has implications for us because if it's in the shallow areas of the harbour where you get nice, flat, calm, sunny days, the temptation might be to drop an anchor and just float around for a while having a picnic. This symbol here actually says don't anchor. It's an anchor with a cross through it. So anywhere you find something you shouldn't be doing, it's the activity with a little cross line through it. Maybe it's fishing, maybe it's anchoring. We mentioned cardinals earlier, and the cardinal marks, here's one shown on the chart. This is telling us that the safest place is south, and indeed north of this cardinal mark we've got these rocks. So for a bigger boat, that would be quite a hazardous place. And finally, an example of danger. This actually is an isolated danger mark. So if you see one of these, Dennis the Menace coloured marks, that's what it looks like on the chart. We'll talk more about buoyage in a later session, but black, red and black, that means don't go anywhere near it. There's a specific danger underneath the water that could catch you out. You can actually find in the insert, so when we open the chart up, it actually had a key to symbols, so all the abbreviations, the buoyage, what it means, all the little indications on the land, and then any letter abbreviations actually on the chart. So one of the things we didn't talk about, let's just come back and see if there's an example here. The letter R here suggests that there's rocks. Can't quite see it on here, but in Poole Harbour there's normally a letter M to tell us that the seabed is made of mud. So useful to know what the seabed's made of. This again is the other side of that insert in the charts pack, and that shows us specifically what all the objects mean. And you can see, you might be able to see here, that it actually refers to those rocks, so different types of rocks and how they represent themselves. Basically any type of rock is worth staying away from. If we're really interested, you can actually buy what's called an Admiralty 5011 chart, and that'll give you all of the symbols that you find on IMRE and Admiralty charts. So let's have a look at the depths. Depth is something we need to have a consideration of. If we look around the top right hand corner of the chart, it tells us what everything's measured in. So in all UK charts, the soundings or the depths are all measured in meters now, but it could be that you've got an older chart, or it could be you're in a part of the world where it's measured in feet or even fathoms. And certainly if you go to the US, then feet and fathoms is commonplace on charts. So let's have a quick look at this image here. We've got, for example here, a depth of 6'9", and that means that the lowest tide, the worst case scenario there, in theory, is 6.9 meters of water. Now that doesn't seem so bad, but when you think to get in there, you actually come through this area, which is 4.4 meters, or even this area, which is 0.9 meters, and that's surrounded by rocks as well. So it's really quite important that you looked at this information before heading into this particular place, Dawson Harbour. So if we know that it's 0.9 meters deep, worst case scenario, we could then go on and figure out how much tide we've got and what our level of tide is on top of that 0.9 meters. That's over and above what we're talking about today, but we can actually take a tidal calculation and figure out how deep the water's truly going to be. But as a safety feature, we could say that coming in this way means that we're always in 4 meters of water. The lowest the tide ever drops, it's always going to be 4 meters deep. So keep an eye out for the rocks. Keep an eye out for the shallows. We've also got measurements on the drying areas, and these have got little underlines. So compared to our 6.9 meters that we started off with here, 6 with a small 9, we've now got 6.4 meters, 6 with a small 4, but because it's got the underline underneath it, that's a negative value. So when the tide's at its absolute lowest, that is actually sticking out of the water by 6.4 meters. So the difference between here and here is over 13 meters. Wow. We definitely need to be avoiding this bit, and we definitely don't want to get that wrong. If we went on a day where there's about, this is somewhere where you can have a tide of up to 7 meters of water on top of that, at 7 meters tide, the whole lot would be covered up, but this would only be 60 centimeters deep. Again, we'll talk more about tides in another session, but this is really important to bear this in mind. And if in doubt, stay away from anything that on an Admiralty chart is green, on an IMRE chart is yellow. More information we've got around the side of the chart. Communications. So we talked earlier about getting hold of the harbour commissioners, and in Poole it actually tells us here that we've got a phone number to call them on, or indeed we've got a harbour control VHF channel. So if I've got the radio turned on in the boat, that's the first stage. I know that on VHF channel 14 I can actually talk to the harbour control, and these are the folks who are actually monitoring and observing the whole harbour. So the advantages of actually having that communication line open, and not necessarily so that we can constantly talk to them, but possibly that we can listen to the activities that are going on in the harbour. If there's commercial shipping going through, anything unusual, divers who are working in the water, all of that information is put out on the harbour control channel. Maybe it prevents incidents like this happening, where if you'd been listening to the radio, you'd know there was a huge ferry behind you and would save that embarrassment and possibly danger. So communications are also useful if we want to go to places. So two examples that I tend to use in Poole Harbour are actually on the quay here. We've got a marina called Poole Quay Boathaven, and we contact them on VHF channel 80. We know that because on the side of the chart we actually had a list of all the marinas, and there they are: Cobbs Quay, Sunseeker, Saltons. We've come down all the way, Poole Quay Boathaven, there we go, VHF channel 80. Even tells us what to call, so we actually pick up the radio and call Poole Quay Boathaven. So the information's on the chart, and that means we're not struggling to get hold of the people. If we want to go in here and stop, moor up for lunch, pay a mooring fee, then we'd contact them first on the radio, and they'd tell us not just that it was okay, but which one of these berths to go to. Otherwise you might find that you'd wandered into the office and they'd asked you to move it, which means you've got to park your boat twice. Here's the chart, the overhead chart of the Boathaven, and you can see again that satellite image just gives us an idea, a representation of what we're actually seeing on the chart. Another example here, a lake yard, a club further down the harbour, and we know that we can contact them on channel M, which is also known as VHF channel 37. So same thing applies. We can give them a shout on the VHF and ask if it's safe to go in, which berth to park in. So the other thing that I need to just finish off talking about is electronic navigation. And what we don't want to do when we're presenting charts is come over as all paper-based. We very much embrace the fact that we've got fantastic electronic navigation facilities on our phones, tablets, and you can very easily download the Navionics software to your tablet or phone and actually have it as something that you can carry around. It costs about £34 a year to subscribe, and you get the charts for your specific area. If your boat is slightly better equipped, then it might have one of these chart plotters on board that's actually giving you an electronic representation of the charts. They're not necessarily holding up to the same level that the Admiralty and IMRE charts are actually detailed and surveyed to. So what we'd always recommend is actually having one of each. So have your electronic chart source, have your electronic navigation source alongside your paper-based resource. But it's a nice easy way to actually have a backup, a plan B. That being said, I'd still, as we've discussed, always carry my, if I was in Poole Harbour, my Y23 chart. Here it is in its full glory, zoomed out. Y23 at the bottom there. And one of the really important things that we need to make sure is if we're using a chart plotter, an electronic chart plotter, down in the bottom right hand corner here, if you can see, it says WGS84. We need to make sure that we are, there we go, let's zoom in, WGS84, we need to make sure that we've got the same grid setting on our chart plotter as we're seeing on our paper chart. All it means is where these grid lines are positioned on the chart, they're in exactly the same place on the chart plotter. So when you're using your chart plotters to navigate electronically, measuring to a place that you've calculated on the chart, you end up in the same location. We've also got the option of the same chart but in a laminated form. I'll have a look at that in a second. And here again is my slightly smaller scale C4 chart to cover the whole coast. So if we're actually taking the charts and measuring how to get from one place to another, or references, then we need to actually have a little bit of kit. And we'll just have a look at that now, how you'd actually do that. If we're taking a compass on the boat to figure out which way we're going, we need to have actually measured that direction on the chart to begin with. So how do we do that? Let's have a look. Let's head back over to the overhead chart cam and see how that works. So I think the example we'll use here is, let's imagine we are just outside the harbour. And let's imagine we're going from this point here. Well, maybe if we were coming out of the harbour, we'd be somewhere around buoy number 10. We're going to head down to this channel buoy number 8. And what I'd do is I'd actually take my Portland plotter. Let's just zoom out and see how this is working. So the Portland plotter, I take my 2 points and so if I'm going from 10 to 8, I position the edge of the plotter in the direction I'm going. The other important thing is that the direction of bearing, direction of travel arrow, is pointed in the direction I want to go. So because I'm going from 10 to 8, I have the arrow pointing in that direction. Let's zoom back in, and finally I take the bezel in the middle and rotate it. And what I'm looking to do is to get any of these lines, these grid lines in the bezel. I'm looking to actually get them, let's line it up with your screen, that makes life a bit easier, doesn't it? I'm looking to get any of those lines parallel with one of the grid lines on the chart. So I can see one coming in through here. There we go. So I'm trying to get those parallel. So if I do that, they're not parallel. If I do that, they are parallel. So that's where I'm traveling. Let's draw a little line. My own worst enemy here. On a course, I would criticize people for not sharpening the pencil. Look at that, dreadful. So I've drawn the line on the chart, and I've got the bezel position now to give me a reading here. If I rotate that, you can see that is actually about 136 degrees. So 136 degrees. We've measured that on the chart, so we'd have to make a slight alteration to make it magnetic for our compass. So we know which direction we want to go in. What we might do also is just give ourselves an expectation of what sort of distance we're traveling. And if you remember back at the beginning, I said that we can use the latitude scale on the side of the chart. So if I measure from 10 to 8, move my dividers open, and then I take that measurement to the side of the chart, that is just over, let's mark that there, just over half a mile. So we're traveling 136 degrees for half a mile. So all of a sudden it all ties together quite nicely, and we can see that it's quite easy to measure what you're doing on the chart. We could go one stage further and we could actually measure, draw a grid reference location for where we're going to, but that's something we'll cover in another session. So I hope you've enjoyed this basic introduction and chat through charts and why they're useful. And it's probably a good point to mention that this really leads on, if this is a level that you're thinking, yeah, this is kind of where I am, it leads us nicely onto an essential navigation and seamanship course, which is a course we offer and also support with interactive online sessions. If this is actually a very basic level and you think, oh, I'm already beyond that, then maybe looking at something like the Day Skipper theory, which actually takes you a little bit further afield. One of the things we'd always encourage to be able to talk to the harbour authorities and the mariners is to actually make sure that if you've got a VHF radio on the boat, that you undertake a VHF course, and that's something we can provide online as well. So again, I hope this has been useful. My name's Dom, and if you've got any queries, drop us a line, get in touch on our social media channels, check out our website, and please rate this video underneath, have a chat about anything that you want to see or any questions you've got, and hopefully we'll have you following our other sessions that we run. Take care for now, and stay safe on the water.